Welcome to the Sensitive Shift podcast, where Agathe and Anna, we're highly sensitive people, and food is an area that impacts us greatly, personally and professionally.
A quick recap of last episode. In our last two episodes, actually, which were two-parters, we explored the relationship between high sensitivity and career choices, the role our sensitivity plays in our daily professional activities, and emotion and stimulation at work. We continued our conversation in the place of highly sensitive people in regards to leadership, entrepreneurship, and self-employment in part 2 of the episode.
As a reminder, in our podcast, we focus on the personality trait of being highly sensitive. Sensitivity is found on a spectrum, and much like other personality traits, all of us range between low and high.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about the place of our sensitivity in relationship with food. Maybe a bit more of a niche conversation, but after all, we all eat, and food is tied to culture, emotion, family, and so much more in our identity.
And while, yes, there isn't a lot of research out there specifically studying this connection between high sensitivity and food, we still have lots to say, lots of stories to share. So let's dive in.
And when we talk about this topic, or when we put the words together of food, maybe of fitness or health and fitness industry, and then we put together sensitivity or high sensitivity, there's something in me that almost feels like, oh, they don't really go together as how we know these industries in our current culture now. But I'm wondering if there's a first thought or first feelings that come up for you when we mention all these words together or these topics together.
I think I'm a little bit biased as a dietitian because I'm thinking about food and our relationship with food. I'm thinking about the way we feel in our body all the time. And I'm also so privileged to have heard and been part of probably hundreds, maybe thousands of conversations about those topics. And while the actual term highly sensitive person isn't as frequently mentioned in my sessions, I think about sensitivity and the connection with food pretty much every day, whether it's in my life and my experience or whether I'm in a client session. Probably the first thing that I would think about is that because we eat every day and food is very sensory, right? We look and we are either appealed by or sometimes disgusted by. Like, we can have many different feelings about food, aversions to food or enjoyment of food by the way that it looks, by the way that it smells, by the way that it feels if we're eating with our hands, for example, or it's the way that it feels inside of our mouth. It might feel predictable or unpredictable. Maybe we're surprised by the way that the food feels, or by once we've eaten it, the way we feel in our body. And that could be both a physical sensation of this food feels this way in my stomach. I feel uncomfortable, or I feel really pleasantly satisfied, or whether it's the mental or emotional implications of eating. So I might be feeling a certain way physically, but then mentally questioning if that was the best decision for me, or did I eat enough? Did I not eat enough? How did other people eat? So all of that can be going on and impacting our experience in our body. As sensitive individuals, I think all of those decision making and all of those sensations, I think a lot of the time could be on high volume.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it makes a lot of sense that you have a lot to say. This is quite literally your jam. So I'm happy that we get to hear your wisdom today. And it is a topic that is very charged, I think, with emotions, with judgment, with how people navigate these feelings and these topics in our current society. And I think this is a great place where we get to piece apart some of that and come back to some of those embodied feelings around how does it feel in your body when you are nourishing yourself versus the foods that you enjoy, the foods that you may not enjoy. Why do you not enjoy them? Is it a psychological part of your body that says there's a reason why I'm not enjoying this?
Mm.
Or is it societal? Or is it physical?
Mm-hmm.
And
Or all three
yeah, exactly.
at the same time.
And I, I like the fact that we take some time to look at all of that together because it is a holistic view on that intersection between, for us, sensitivity and those topics. And I also, when we put them all together, for me, my first thought is there's something that feels like an effort to align and at the same time feels very natural to align, a little bit like you were saying. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting tension based on kind of the environment that we're brought up in and also the work that we've done so far as professionals. I would say mostly on my part to understand those connections and to kind of unlearn some things that were not helpful for me and my body, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and for my judgment of others through these lenses and topics. Well, you've explained to us in previous episode that you are a registered dietitian and that being highly sensitive supports your profession. And you talked to us a little bit more specifically about being a counselor and to be trained in intuitive eating in particular. So, could you tell us a little bit more about intuitive eating?
Yes, of course. First, on being a dietitian, I'll start off right away by saying that dietitians can work in so many different ways and support people's health, their confidence, help them to make changes to their eating patterns, to support health overall. And they can do this in many different ways. And I've taken a particular path down the road of intuitive eating. And I think this came from a place of experience in counseling, at least at the beginning of my career, and feeling quite uncomfortable with the idea that I was sitting in a position of being the expert, of
Mm.
collecting information and then being the one to decide, okay, this is almost like, I don't want to say this out loud, but you can eat this, or you should eat this, and then you should eat this other thing, and then you can choose between this or this. And it
Mm.
just didn't sit right to me that I would be the one who was making all of the decisions. And I was looking for a way or a framework that would be much more collaborative and that would acknowledge that I'm working with an individual and they are the expert of their body. And I, yes, can also be the expert of nutrition and nutritional science and understand the impact of certain nutrients and encourage certain kind of general patterns, but I always wanted that to be more collaborative. And so I find myself over the years having specialized, and now am so lucky to be working specifically with clients to support their relationship with food, often unlearning some of the potentially harmful influences from diet culture and helping people to reconnect to their natural eating rhythms through intuitive eating. And that's your question, I guess, which is
Mhm.
on the topic of intuitive eating and what it is. I'm very happy that intuitive eating has gained popularity in the last few years, is trendy, and I think most people will have heard of the term. But specifically, the definition of intuitive eating is that it is a self care eating framework which integrates instinct, emotion, and rational thought. Um, I'm going to myth bust right off the bat that it is not a hunger and fullness diet where you're allowed to eat when you're hungry or not allowed to eat when you're full, or there's any shame attached to those.
Mm.
It's actually much more sophisticated and nuanced than that. Although, yes, hunger and fullness are important and key principles, they're not. They're not even the two most important ones. And they're definitely not the only ones. So, intuitive eating as a framework was created by two dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich, in 1995. So, that's pretty cool. It's been around for about 30 years now. It's a weight inclusive, evidence based model with a validated assessment scale, so a way to scale this and measure. And there's also over 100 studies on intuitive eating.
Mm.
So this is not just like a theoretical thing that sounds nice and magical and colorful. It really is evidence based. The framework itself includes 10 principles, and I love like chatting with my clients about the word principle. It's not rule, it's not a diet rule. It's really to give us some semblance of structure. And all of the different principles of the 10, they work together, and usually they're categorized and they work in two ways. So they're categorized in either a principle that's helping people to cultivate attunement. So, this is attunement and awareness of the sensations that arise in our body. And attunement, we can already start to imagine, helps people to get their biological and psychological needs met, because when we can feel and we're aware of what our sensations are, we're that one step closer to recognizing what we need and then having our needs met. And the other way that the principles work, so if it's not by actively cultivating attunement, the other way that the principles work is by working to remove any obstacles or what are called disruptors to that attunement. And usually those obstacles are going to be things that are in our mind. So they might be rules, diet rules, for example, or beliefs, limiting beliefs, or things like thoughts that for example, this food is bad for me, or
Mm.
I should be eating this food, or anything that's kind of getting into the way of our body is saying one thing and our mind is saying another. And then we're in this state of tension. This, as you can imagine, is super relevant for HSPs, and I'm drawing the connection because we are naturally, or at least when we're optimally stimulated, because of course there's always exceptions, but we're naturally deep feelers, we're naturally perceptive, and I think that we're naturally intuitive as well. So when we talk about the ability and the principles that are helping to cultivate attunement, I think in some ways our sensitive peers are already sort of predisposed to be quite attuned to
Mm.
their sensations.
Yeah, and I like that you tied it back to sensitivity, because it is interesting that a lot of the principles seem to integrate elements linked to tuning into our senses and our stimuli in a mindful way. And so that
Mm-hmm.
does remind us of a lot of the overlapping features of HSPs. How do you find intuitive eating further overlaps with your relationship with food as an HSP?
I was probably drawn to intuitive eating because it made the most sense for me in
Mm-hmm.
my relationship with food. When I was in school and learning about nutrition, as I was learning about this food is good and this food will help with this and prevent this disease and this kind of thing, that I wanted to do a lot of the things that I was learning. And I wanted to be a positive role model and implement a lot of those sort of new information. And I don't know if that was that wasn't the thing that was working for me, to
Mm.
be kind of trying to follow all of these reasons to eat food that were other than what I was actually feeling in my body in those
Mhm.
moments. Where it comes to sensitivity and recognizing the variability of sensitivity in others, it only sort of recently made sense to me why intuitive eating kind of came a little bit easier for me. I learned about it and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I want to do this. I'm going to do this. And then the more I shared it with others and in the context of counseling, I, of course, realized that for some people, it does feel a lot easier. And for some, there are different challenges. And I think sensitivity is probably one of those factors.
Mhm. Yeah, what you're saying about going from a model that didn't really work for you reminds me a lot of this like one size fits all kind of model where we're we're taught a lot, often indirectly, that this is what a meal looks like, and it's the same, and the portions or the proportions of how much food groups are present looks the same and looks
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't really take into account things like the person who's in front of you and how they are in terms of their identity. Is it like their gender, their socioeconomic status, their family system? Like there's not that much variability. And I remember feeling similarly to you as I was maybe at first very unconsciously, but navigating my relationship with food, that the constant message was something is wrong with me for feeling like I'm falling outside of what is considered the norm always. And that's a little bit what I'm hearing with what you're presenting, maybe more as a professional and your identity, um, for then supporting other people with your work, but also maybe personally as well, as you understood what that meant for you.
I can hear what you're saying. And actually, the I'd say the biggest takeaway from nutrition, and obviously it's more complex than that, but the biggest takeaway that I have is actually it's really much more about our patterns over the long term than it is about one meal, one food, one day, one week, even one month
Yeah.
of eating. So this level of fear and almost like rigidity about the rules and the quote unquote right way to eat is not really based in science. Personally, my connection with intuitive eating and in my relationship with food, and of all the principles, well, I love all the principles, but of all the principles, the one that resonates the most strongly for me and the one that I hold on to even today is the principle that's called discovering the satisfaction factor.
Mm.
And that is a principle about attunement. So it's not a disruptor, it's one of those practicing attunement principles. And satisfaction is actually the pleasure based principle and almost the hub of intuitive eating that connects all of the principles together. And the idea behind this principle is that when you eat the foods that you really enjoy in a pleasant environment, hopefully, then the pleasure from this experience can be such a powerful force to help us feel satisfied and content. And even to me, I feel like that also extends to other areas of my life as well.
Mm.
And one of the most common ways to connect to the satisfaction principle is to ask yourself the question, either if it's just before you eat, but it could also be a question that you ask yourself when you're about to go to the grocery store, for example, or in your planning phases. And you ask yourself, what is it that I really want to eat right now? And sometimes this will produce an image right away in your mind. Like usually for me that's like grilled cheese. It's very commonly grilled cheese. But if it doesn't present an image right away, then we can kind of uh, get into this a little bit more by thinking about what texture or what temperature am I in the mood for, what flavor profile, what quantity. So, how hungry am I in the moment? What do I need to feel satisfied? What kind of presentation do I want? Do I feel like putting it on a pretty plate with gold cutlery? Or do I feel like sandwich on the go is the vibe, right? So, when I can imagine this, then I can connect to what will be enjoyable or satisfying for me. And then I can do my best to go and get that or to have my needs met. Even though for me, what that translates to in practice is that I might go to the grocery store a little bit more often during the week, or I might cook a little bit more often in smaller quantities. So I won't necessarily meal prep for 5
Mm.
meals because I don't know that I'm going to be in the mood for that 5 times in a row, for example.
Right.
But what I gain from that for me personally is so much more valuable because it allows me to connect to that satisfaction more regularly. It also means practically that I keep a lot of food in my home and I'm like pretty well stocked. So I think I guess maybe you're going to agree with this, but a lot of my friends and family have sort of nicknamed me the snacking queen because whenever they come over, um, I like to feed people.
Snack queen.
And I'm always like, what do you want? Do you want something salty? Do you want something sweet? Do you want something warm? Do you want something cold? Do you want something? And then, like, we get down to what they're in the mood for, and they're always like, oh, that was exactly what I wanted. And that's a little bit what I do with myself. So I make sure that I have all kinds of different variety so that I can best meet my needs in the moment. And that's what's been working.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are the snack queen. I know if I go to your place, I won't leave hungry.
Oh, that's the best compliment. For you, I guess, I want to just invite you into the conversation because we don't need to be an expert or a dietitian to start thinking about the connection between sensitivity and our relationship with food. And I'm thinking even just along the lines of sensory sensitivity. How has this connection, if at all, shown up for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also something. I mean, my relationship with food and body image, and it is a topic I've explored a lot. Also through my professional identity and the work that I've had to do in order to develop professionally as well. So I've had a lot of time to reflect on on my evolution in those topics. If I go back in my childhood, and those were things I was able to put words on much later when I was able to identify that sensitivity and the sensory sensitivity, I think, is an excellent way to describe it, because I think when you're a child you can just be seen as like fussy or difficult, but for me it was just things were overwhelming. And so like an example with food was that there was a lot of sensations and texture that I didn't enjoy. And so, like, an example that I can say, and it might be surprising to many people, but was that I really enjoyed the flavor of berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries. Like, if I had to eat like strawberry jam, I actually didn't like the jam. I liked the gel, the what's it called? The jelly? Yeah, I think it was, yeah. It wasn't jam, it was jelly because what I didn't like about berries was that they weren't soft. There were seeds in them. And to me, it didn't make sense. Like it didn't register in my brain that when I look, except the strawberries where you can see the seeds, raspberries, you don't see them. It looks like a pillow. It looks soft. It looks like blueberries, same thing. You don't expect when you bite into it that you're going to get like a miniature crunch. I understand it's not something intense, but to me, it didn't make sense. It didn't register. And so I didn't like them. I really did not like them. So with the strawberry jam, I didn't like the seeds. So I really liked only, I think it was called like jelly. It was like in French it's a gelée. So it was just like a strained, yeah, it was like a strained jam. So it had the same consistency as jam but without the seeds. So because I liked the flavor, I just didn't like the seeds. And then as an adult, then I got over it. Maybe I could say it that way. But I really just there were flavors or there were textures that I just had a very hard time with. And then sometimes it was also around the combination of flavors. So I would separate my food. Like if in my plate I had three different foods, like I had a vegetable, and I had like a pasta, and then I had some meat or some or fish or something like that. I didn't mix them together, or I didn't have a spoonful with each of them in the same spoonful. I would first eat my peas, and then after my vegetable, then I would eat my pasta, then I would eat the fish, or usually I would keep for the end the one that I enjoyed the most. Yeah. And I still kind of do that.
Yeah.
Maybe not as much because
Mhm.
I like
Same.
I like like exploring with
Yeah.
flavors. Um
Yeah, you know, like in restaurants, when you like fancy restaurants, you get a dish and there's like all the like five different sauces and like
yeah.
they and everyone's like, wow, like the flavors, they go so well together. And I'm always like, I'm gonna eat like my scallop and then I'm gonna eat my potato and then I'm gonna like
yeah.
I just don't want all 10 of these things
Yeah, it's a
in the
lot.
same
Uh,
bag.
it's a
I
lot
still
of
think it's
stimulation.
delicious,
Yes, yes.
but I don't know. Like, yeah,
So sometimes
totally.
I'll try, like I'll have a few spoonful with like a mix.
Hmm.
Now
Yeah.
I do that.
Yeah, now
But
we've evolved.
yes. We're an evolved species now.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but as a kid, there's no way. I was just no. And I think you touched on something that was interesting that also reminds me of that, maybe a more negative experience. But you touched on environment. You spoke about
Mhm.
noise or calm environments and
Yeah.
noisy, I should say. And that was also something that was a big part of my relationship with food was uh, where I was eating and judgment. And so I remember in school once my it was in first grade, so it was a very early memory. I think I was like 6 years old, and my mom had made me a lunchbox. And because we're from a different culture, I was in Canada, but my parents are French. What I had in my lunchbox was different than what some of my comrades,
Peers? Yeah.
what my peers had in their lunchbox. And uh, most of the time, that meant I felt like I was missing out. Like I never had like Dunkaroos, and I never had
Goldfish.
goldfish. Yeah,
Me
I
neither.
really didn't really grow up with the
Yeah.
North American snacks. But then
Mhm.
what happened to me was one time. I remember of one time specifically. I was made fun of my lunchbox, like what I had in my lunchbox. And so for a very long time, I had a hard time eating in front of people. And then when I reached middle and high school with the bullying, lunchtime was the time where you went with your group of friends. And when
Mm.
I was kind of ostracized from my group of friends, I didn't have anywhere to eat. So I didn't eat for a very long time during lunch
Mm.
hour because I didn't want to be seen eating alone because that made you a target very quickly. And it was just, I felt like eating was a vulnerable gesture.
Yeah.
I didn't like to be seen eating. I thought that it looked weird or bad. I just didn't like that moment or that gesture.
Mm-hmm.
So environment was a big deal for me for a very long time.
Yeah.
A lot less now because I've traveled a lot on my own, so I've had to be much more brave around eating in spaces alone. But it's not easy, and it often impacts my appetite and um, the food choices that I will make when I'm on my own. I'll choose something that's easy to eat. It's not messy. Um,
Yeah.
it's on the go, or it's quick, or I can take it with me, or something like that, rather than like a sit down dinner. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now I challenge myself more, but in the past, that was
Yeah.
definitely it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about that as a highly sensitive person, it makes a lot of sense
Hmm.
that you be um, just more aware and sensitive to your environment. And of course, bullying is super intense and an extreme. And also, if we think about the nervous system and when we talk about the depth of processing, right? So, already just the action of eating is a stimulating, like, there's so much, there's all of our senses are involved when we talk about mindful eating. It's awareness of the senses, but whether we're aware or not, there's something going on when we're eating. And that can pretty easily become overwhelming if it's, whether it's like a noisy environment, so a very physical sort of external stimulation, or um, internally emotions heightened, like being hyper aware or alert about potential bullying or
Hmm.
potential judgment or comments or anything coming in from the outside is going to make eating a lot more challenging. And that's true for everybody.
Yeah.
um, but I can definitely see the connection there. Yeah.
What about you, Anna? Any sensory subtleties?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When I was very little, I don't really remember having that much autonomy
Mm,
over food. Like, food was like, this is what was for, and this is parenting too, right?
yeah.
But it was, this is what's for dinner. If you don't like this, well, then you don't eat. And I think for me, one of the sensations that I am very aware of within myself is for hunger. And I find it a very unpleasant sensation. So I often would eat foods, even though I didn't really like the food. I would often eat food when I was very little. And then a little bit later on, when I could express myself and say no, I remember starting to say no to some foods. And then I have like a very vivid memory of my dad being like, "This is your rebellious phase. You're just trying to control things."
Mm.
And I was like, "This is gaslighting." I didn't know the term gaslighting, but I was like, "No, like, I actually really don't like this
Mm.
food. It's really bothering me." And it would be foods usually that are like an unpredictable texture, or like fish, for example. If you don't know there's going to be a bone in it, or I had a bone
Mm.
once and then I would stop
Yeah.
eating and it would be like impossible for me to, like, any, nobody could get me to continue eating my salmon patty once there was like a fish bone in it. Nope. Shutting this down. Anything that has a predictable regular texture, so texture was really big for me. Although with taste, I liked the taste of a lot of things, so I wasn't very particular there, and I'd always liked to eat, but I was pretty sensitive to being hungry. So if I was out and I was hungry, I was very unhappy or very uncomfortable. Um, and so I needed to, I think, eat enough and eat regularly in order to feel okay.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting to talk about because these are like our internal signals that we often we let our rational the rational part of our brain take over to not necessarily invalidate, but to try to tame what's going on when they're real gut feelings, whether it's a gut feeling about a situation, whether it's a gut feeling about like a sensory need around like food or sleep, right? Or safety. And we don't necessarily listen to that because we've been so conditioned
Yeah,
to live in society where we don't just act on our instincts. We have
right.
to bend over for rules, and if we eat at 12 we eat at 12, like it's okay if
Yeah.
you're hungry at 10. Like, oh my goodness, I grew up with that so much. It was like we don't eat
Well,
outside of um meal
meal
hours.
times.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, me too.
And
Yeah.
so, or if we did, we had to wait until 4 p.m. where it was like the snack time, and then I was like, oh, I don't want to.
Yeah, that makes me so sad. Like, it makes me so sad because I really think that the more that we are aware and then are able to respond to whether it's like hunger and timing, or it's, I really want that food
Hmm.
and that's the food I'm going to have, that is so powerful for building trust within ourselves.
Hmm. It brings up so many other like parallel conversation around, we started that a little bit in our second episode with childhood or on like parenting, and this is all conversation that are based in also in culture and based on generational differences. And so I also know that, for example, when I go back to my parents' house, my mom put so much effort into preparing a meal. So I understand that then it's tied to disappointment if then I show up to dinner and I'm not my hunger level is not as high as she would like, so that I feel satisfied with the food that she's prepared. Like it becomes a whole other conversation than about food. And so that's also why we say that food is so much more than tied to only satisfying a need around hunger.
Oh yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, it's values and it's competing values, right? There's the value of sharing a meal and the social connection and honoring the effort and the thoughtfulness behind food being prepared for you, and being hungry enough to share it
Hmm.
at the same time as other people and be able to participate in the, oh, did you try this? That's so
Right.
good. Have it like
Yeah. And people wanting to serve you a second time, and that being insulting if you say no, and like things, and it's like we're mixing everything.
that's valid.
Mm.
And it's also valid to want to arrive to dinner in a pleasant state.
Mhm.
So not, you know, ravenous and grumpy. Like there's all these there's all these practical um implications of what does that mean if I want to honor all of the different things that I value. And I think today we're just making space for the idea that one of those values could be that we honor our internal sensations,
Mhm.
and those being, yes, of the level of hunger and fullness, but also about the kind of foods we want to eat and the way we want to eat and the speed at which we want to eat, and like all of the different aspects of eating that make up our experience. I think it's time for our fun segment.
Let's do it.
And we are bringing back a fan favorite. So we're bringing back the segment of a would you rather. And we are going to guess each other's because we're going to see how well we know each other. So I guess I'm going to start with you. So I'm going to read the would you rather and then I will guess and then you will explain. Well, you'll tell me if I'm right and then you'll explain. So the first would you rather is would you rather eat your favorite meal in a noisy, crowded restaurant or a mediocre, but it's still food safe. Okay. Mediocre meal in a peaceful, lovely, quiet, beautiful environment. I think favorite meal in noisy, crowded, but tell me, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, I even have a hard time deciding because I think it's very 50-50. It would very much depend what mood I'm in. I remember on my birthday, I chose a restaurant that I really loved the food, but I
Uh-huh.
knew the setting was going to
Right.
be.
I was thinking of that.
I knew you were thinking about that. That's why you chose it.
She did choose that.
Yeah. Because I really enjoyed the food and the food made me really happy. And because it was my birthday, I was kind of in a celebratory
Yeah.
mood. So the noisy, more crowded environment didn't bother me as much because I was in more of a celebratory party. I'm around people, I'm with people mood. However, if I'm feeling a lot more like low energy, or I would say my standard would probably be a bit more leaning towards the second option to be more in a peaceful, quiet environment, which is my almost my everyday. I live on my own. I created my apartment to be that, to be a peaceful, quiet environment. I don't think I cook mediocre food all the time. Maybe sometimes it is, but not all the time. My normal tendency would be more towards being in a peaceful, quiet environment because it really affects me. If the environment is not great, I'm just gonna chug whatever it is that I'm eating. I'm not really gonna enjoy it anyway. So it's really context dependent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, your turn. So, Anna, would you eat only spicy food for a whole day or only bland food for a whole day? I think I already know what this is. It's going to be you only eat bland food for a whole day.
Yeah, I pretty much only eat bland food anyway. It's not bland to me.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I remember one day I wanted to cook something at yours and I was like, "Where's your spice cabinet?" And you're like, "I don't have
Yeah,
one."
it's salt. I technically have pepper, but I never use it. It's basically just salt. Yeah. I guess. Would you rather be in a situation where you had to eat a new dinner meal? You didn't get to choose it, but a new dinner meal every day for a month, or the same meal every day for dinner for a month? Okay, yours are hard. I don't know. I think maybe a new dinner meal cuz yeah, like pretty adventurous. I'm going to let you answer. I'm not sure about this one.
If breakfast and lunch is the same and then only dinner changes, then yes, I would choose a new dinner that I didn't get to choose every day. But then if breakfast and lunch can change every day, then I would probably have the same, I would be okay with having the same meal for dinner. Although, if I had to choose, I'm a big fan of pasta, so I would eat the pasta all day, every day, and I have no problem.
All right. All right.
Okay, guys. Would you rather eat at a restaurant where the lighting is too bright or too dim? Too dim.
Obviously.
Yeah. Pretty obvious.
Why were mine so hard? Okay.
Well, once I went to
Yeah.
a restaurant. I think that's interesting for our topic. I went
Hmm.
to a restaurant where it's like blackout. It's you can't see anything.
Hmm.
And so I thought that I was going to hate it because I'm so sometimes really I need to see what I'm eating
Right.
so that
Yes.
I know that it's
Yeah.
okay to go in my mouth.
Safe. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I did because it
Hmm.
removed one stimulation source.
Yeah.
And so I was able to tune into other things that maybe usually doesn't take precedent over
Mm.
the visual portion. And as long as I made sure that it was safe from a point of view of like, there's things I can't eat, and so it wasn't in there, uh,
Hmm.
I was able to actually enjoy the experience for what it was and just kind of understand what my body was going through. Whereas sometimes I think when we're eating, it's very mechanical. It becomes very much like, okay, I serve myself the portion that I expected myself to eat, even though like I'm eating a bit more than I need to in terms of my fullness level or hunger level, because it's just it kind of becomes an automatic
Hmm.
thing that we do.
Yeah.
And in that moment in that restaurant, I had no idea how small or big my plate was. And so I was able to listen a lot more to the experience in my body. And I thought that
Wow.
that was very interesting. And I didn't think I would like it. And I really enjoyed it, actually.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially on the lines of sort of tuning into the amount that you
Mm-hmm.
need because we're not scared that we're approaching the end of the plate, but we're
Mm-hmm.
still hungry, or we're like, oh my gosh, I haven't made a dent in this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how am I gonna,
Yeah.
you know? So there's none of those thoughts that are there. It's just, what am I feeling? And do I need the next bite? How do I
Yeah.
feel about the next bite? And you can stop when you need to. That's really interesting.
HSP minute. What did you do or what will you do this week, Anna, to nurture your sensitivity?
Well, since we're already talking about food, this week, actually, I'm going to need to be a little bit more intentional about food, um, mainly because I have quite the busy schedule coming up. And sometimes that means that I delay a little bit, or like the activity becomes the priority. And I need to be intentional about taking care and taking the time to plan for that.
Mm.
Especially, I'm going to say dance related. So I'm performing tonight, and there's a
Woo!
big dance convention and workshops, and I know myself, and I'm going to want to do all the things, and I'm going to need to take time to eat and then also take time to digest.
Yes, yes.
So I might need to skip a workshop or two or say no to a few things and just balance that out. So I'll be extra intentional about that this weekend and in the coming days. What about you?
I'm about to go on vacation, and when we travel, often our eating schedule can be a bit unpredictable. The food choices can also be a little unpredictable. Um, and so I feel like I'm going to be, and it's kind of in line with how I'm feeling in general these days, that I really want to move with a lot of um, very mindfully and very gently listening to my body. I feel like I need to give it a real break. So whether it's um, activities or whether it's food related, I really want to be able to listen so that I can make the choices that feel the most right in the moment, and move with as little judgment as possible for myself in those
I
moments.
support this.
Yeah, not always easy, but I think that's what I need. So we'll
Yeah,
do our best and try
as always.
to disconnect and relax a little bit. All right, a little disclaimer that while we're discussing contents that are related to personal wellness, they do not constitute as advice. We acknowledge that each experience is different, and if you're looking for specific support, then you may consider one on one professional help individualized to you.
Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode on navigating the news and social media as an HSP.